Hello, NCSA attendees, and special thanks to those who put this together given the circumstances. I'm Pat Sefrin, Associate Professor at Marywood University in Scranton, Pennsylvania, in the Social Science Department there. The title of my talk is Consequences of Unfavorable Mismatches in Criminal Justice to Behavior, Race, Drugs, and Violence. So, in this study, I examined the relationship between drugs, violence, and criminal justice involvement, with a special focus on race and social class. While social class does not appear in the title, as we shall see here shortly, there is reason to believe that the greater risk for drug violence facing blacks may be similar to the greater risk facing lower class whites, but perhaps for different reasons. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. African Americans are arrested and incarcerated for drug-related offenses at rates that exceed those of whites. Yet whites are more likely than African Americans to report using illegal drugs and have higher rates of alcohol use as well. African Americans are also arrested for violent crime and self-report violence at rates higher than whites, but are less likely than whites who commit the same violent offenses to be arrested and charged. This suggests that African Americans are underserved by the criminal justice for violence, while also being overserved for illegal drugs. The current study considers how these misalignments, along with the history of differential treatment under the law, has made drug use rarer but riskier for blacks when compared to whites. What you see before you is the theoretical model upon which this paper is based. But first, let me give you some background. Most criminological theories say nothing specific about drug-related violence, but there is general acknowledgement that the two are related. The relationship that drugs share with violence requires special attention, especially as the relationship is so highly variable as past research suggests. Drug-related violence is said to arise from a nexus of psychopharmacological, economic, compulsive, and systemic risk factors that are difficult to tease apart. The fact that drug use is illegal, so that even a casual user cannot help but to mix with at-risk populations, so for example drug dealers and chronic drug users, is a systemic risk factor. So is relying on self-help justice, which is unavoidable in illegal and unregulated drug markets. If systemic risk factors embody the social environments of drug use, then the relationship that drugs share with violence must be permeated by matters related to culture and social class. The sociological literature on these topics is discursive, but there is broad agreement that being black, male, and from a lower socioeconomic class places one at risk for violence. For these reasons, being black and male should also be thought of as a systemic risk factor for drug violence. Now, exactly how much racial prejudice exists in the criminal justice system is debatable, but drug use and violent behavior are, at the very least, not responded to proportionally in the black community, with blacks underserved by the criminal justice system for violence and overserved for drugs, as stated previously. Such racial mismatches in the application of criminal justice to behavior are corrosive to the social contract, according to a long line of theorizing going back to at least Thomas Hobbes, who saw a government's monopoly over the use of violence as necessary for the maintenance of civilization. The underserved for violence, overserved for drugs problem is a failure of criminal justice to serve the interests of African Americans. This failure is part of a long history of differential treatment of the law based on race that shapes attitudes about policing in black communities. The harsh treatment of African Americans under Jim Crow, sometimes at the hands of police, has left a legacy of legal cynicism and made some African Americans doubt in law enforcement's ability to serve black communities fairly. This has led to lower clearance rates in black communities due to a lack of crime reporting and uncooperative witnesses, which ultimately leads to more crime. Heavy-handed criminal justice tactics of the more contemporary variety might also be at fault for a weakened social contract among blacks. The war on drugs strategy of targeting drugs as a means of eliminating dangerous individuals from the community eventually reached a point of diminishing returns in many black communities. where further enforcement only eroded social trust and provided no greater public safety. Indeed, research finds that drug enforcement efforts have backfired in some cases, causing rates of violent crime to increase, even as overall drug use declines, hence why it may be rarer for blacks, but riskier. So, a recent study used self-report data to show that individual differences in drug use fail to explain black-white differences in drug arrests. This suggests that if blacks are targeted for arrest, they are targeted for arrest regardless of behavior. Furthermore, disaffected members of a community who may have lost a family member to incarceration may come to resent law enforcement efforts, even especially if they know of violent offenders who have not been held to account, as they very well might, as suggested by the relatively low clearance rates for violent crime in majority black neighborhoods. As this has been the state of affairs for African Americans since the end of slavery, no wonder a subculture has emerged within certain cross-sections of young black men who act as if they were living in a state of nature, and understandably so, given the lack of trust in law enforcement to serve their interests. So, returning then to this theoretical model, this shows how the underserved for violence, overserved for drugs problem encircles and interacts with systemic risk factors in the drugs violence nexus. Surrounding the nexus are two systemic risk factors that were mentioned previously: the marginalization of drugs, so for example, users have little choice but to mix with at-risk populations, and self-help justice, which is the only option when recourse to the law is out of the question. The systemic risk factors and the mismatch in criminal justice to behavior are problems that are self-sustaining, as the model implies. The more that drugs are marginalized through strict enforcement, the greater the need for self-help justice. The greater the need for self-help justice, the larger the response will be from criminal justice to impose order, leading to more heavy-handed tactics that can backfire. The theoretical model is not exclusive to African Americans and may apply to whites as well, but probably not to the same degree, because for one, the use of drugs is more widespread in the white population and therefore not as closely associated with the criminal class, so it's just not as marginalized. And two, violent crime is generally higher in majority black versus majority white neighborhoods, which suggests that there will be a greater risk for violence among black drug users as compared to white drug users. A third reason related to the previous two is the underserved for violence, overserved for drugs problem, which is a greater problem among blacks than whites and potentially destructive of a civilization-sustaining social contract. So then, has this history made being black and male especially pivotal for drug-related violence? Well, growth in drug arrests of black suspects from 1960 to 1990 was the single largest contributing factor to the widening black-white gap in arrest for homicide for this period, reversing what was a narrowing trend in homicide rates between blacks and whites. Drug markets in majority black neighborhoods also generate more violent crime than in racially mixed populations. Self-report survey data collected from the Pittsburgh area finds that accounting for race eliminates most of the relationship between drugs and violence, which suggests that race is a crucial factor upon which much else depends. And finally, a similar study using the AdHealth data, the data I used for this study, finds that accounting for individual differences in substance use results in a widening of racial gaps in violent behavior, which suggests that if blacks were to use drugs at rates similar to whites, their rates of violence would be even higher. While the disadvantaged social positions confronting many African Americans are unique for historical reasons, the social and legal troubles they face are not completely unprecedented among lower-class whites. Lower-class whites face similar challenges that are related to low levels of educational attainment, such as exposure to criminal subcultures, feelings of powerlessness, and a general distrust of authorities, all of which may engender reliance on self-help justice. There is also a bevy of psychological sequelae associated with the lower social classes, including heightened levels of anxiety and stress hormones, lower social trust, and hostile attribution bias, all of which could make drug use riskier for the lower classes. These negative stressors might exacerbate the psychopharmacological effects of a drug and make economic compulsive crime more likely. Also, because these stressors are likely to be shared among individuals in the lower classes, they constitute a systemic risk for even the occasional user of drugs. Moreover, there is a history in the research literature of equating black crime with lower social class. This suggests that the intersection of race and social class plays a significant role in moderating the drugs-violence relationship. Drawing on longitudinal data from the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health, the current study compares black and white male survey respondents in terms of self-reported drug use, experiences with violence, and criminal justice involvement. Educational attainment, preferred to income as a measure of social class, will be examined alongside race as a modifier of the drugs-violence relationship. The current study focuses on black and white males for several reasons. First, there are considerable disparities in violence and drug use between these populations. Second, there are known risk and protective factors thought to contribute to black-white differences in criminal offending that the current study is able to control for, including economic disadvantage, delinquent peers, religiosity, educational attainment, marriage, self-control, and IQ. Third, black crime is often equated with lower social class, which suggests that if the risk of violence associated with drug use is greater for blacks and whites, it might also be greater in the lower social classes. Finally, by limiting the samples to males, all of the potential ways in which gender might intervene in the observed relationships may be deferred temporarily until a better understanding of African American levels of drug use and violence comes into focus. Here is the first model that looks at the possibility of the underserved-overserved problem, and logistic regression is used here to examine the impact of race and educational attainment while controlling for risk factors. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I do have a separate slide that reviews all of these results. I want to move on to the next slide with the next set of models. We'll come back to these results here in a moment. And then these models here are looking at the relationship between drugs and violence and whether or not that relationship is modified by race and social class, with social class again being represented here in terms of educational attainment. Okay, so for a summary of the results. So in the cross-sectional analysis of adult arrest for violence and drugs, that logistic model that I showed you just a second ago, just to quickly give you a little bit of context here, criminal behavior typically raises the risk of arrest. So racial disparities in criminal behavior and arrest likelihood suggest differential treatment under the law. The regression models examine the odds of arrest for violent and drug offenses, controlling for risk factors. So looking at the models, despite having a greater risk of experiencing violence, blacks report no greater odds of arrest for a violent offense than do whites. Controlling for violent behavior does not change the difference in odds of arrest between blacks and whites. So that's worth noting, that actual behavior does not seem to be influencing these criminal justice outcomes for blacks as you would naively expect, I guess. Now looking at drug arrest as the outcome, despite having a lesser risk of drug use, blacks report a greater odds of arrest for a drug offense than whites. Odds about 50% higher. But look what happens when you control for drug use. Controlling for drug use makes the odds of arrest for blacks greater still. Blacks are more than 3 times as likely as whites to be arrested once differences in drug use are taken into account. As a comparison, educational attainment consistently reduces the odds of arrest without much variation. So it does look like there is evidence, at least at this self-reported level, of being underserved for violence, because taking violence into account does not change the odds of arrest, the difference in the odds of arrest between blacks and whites. And then for drugs, taking drug use into account makes it so that blacks are even more likely than whites to be arrested, given their relatively low levels of drug use. Okay, so now looking at the relationship between drugs and violence over time, the longitudinal analysis of change in adult violence. This is between waves 3 and 4 of the data, so the average age at wave 3 is 21, then about 28 years in wave 4. So the context here is violence typically declines during this period. So any increase due to drug use is likely interfering with what is often called the process of criminal desistance, that people seem to almost naturally just age out of crime. So when they're not, and we can identify the reasons that they're not, it's worth paying attention to that, I think. Regression models examine the effect of changes in drug use on changes in violence. Drug measures are binary, so an increase would indicate a new user of a specified drug. So blacks report more violent behavior than whites, net of controls, while changes in educational attainment during this period shows no significant effect. Controlling for drug use results in the black-white gap widening slightly. And then when we get to the interactions, drug interactions with race indicate a greater risk for blacks than whites for some drugs. Drug interactions with educational attainment also indicate a lesser risk for highly educated drug users. Perhaps no surprise. I did test three-way interactions with drug use, race, and educational attainment, but these were found to be not significant. Okay, on to the discussion and limitations of this study. The greater risk of violence facing black drug users as compared to white drug users may reflect a history of differential treatment under the law. The underserved for violence, overserved for drugs problem is a recent manifestation of this differential treatment. A weakened social contract is a result of this treatment, the negative consequences of which may be seen in the different effects of drug use for blacks versus whites. Educational attainment, an indicator of social class, dampens the risk that drug use will increase violence. This suggests that both race and class modify the drugs-violence relationship. But they do so independently. There's not a three-way interaction, as I mentioned previously. Okay, so two major limitations here. There are others, but here are two major ones. Self-reports may have biased the results, with possible underreporting being greater for blacks than whites. We know this from previous research. However, the levels at which they are underreporting are not so great that they contradict other research that shows that blacks will report more violence than whites and whites will report more drug use than blacks. Okay, on to I think what is a more serious problem here with this study is a lack of being able to measure the mediating mechanisms between drug use and violence that I proposed in this study. So, for example, legal cynicism, distrust of authorities, reliance on self-help justice should be explored in future research that's trying to pin down what exactly is going on at the level of race or culture and what is going on at the level of social class that would help to make sense out of why those folks who are less educated and or who are black are at a greater risk than the higher educated white counterparts who may use the same drugs. Okay, that is it for this presentation. Thank you for listening, and you have yourself a good day. Bye-bye.